Well, hello everybody, L.A. Little here, and this is your daily NeoTA wrap. When we take a look at these markets, we do it from a neoclassical perspective each time, asking ourselves what happened today, what does it tell us about the coming ones. Do this show 4 times a week, every Monday through Thursday, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's archived on YouTube, available there under the channel L.A. Little. As far as what happened today, we had the Fed come out. And, I don't know that they really said anything different than they have said. Data dependent. Did say that they expect to raise rates at least once this year. Some folks are reading into that twice. Doesn't look like they're going to do it in July. That probably leaves September, October, and December as possible dates. Didn't talk about how much they would raise, although there was one reference in the news conference where Yellen talked about 1/4% raises as a hypothetical to a different question. So it seems to me like that's probably what's on her mind. And as far as what's on the market's mind, the market traded up off that news, even though there was nothing in it that looked to me to be dovish. So that was kind of interesting. Faded at the end of the day and faded even more after hours. It was down about, I think, 6 or 7 after hours shortly afterwards. So markets trade up on the news, probably not going anywhere though. There really was no good reads today from what I can see, but we'll look at what's there. Bonds traded down. They were down even heavier. Ended up at 118. That was about a full point off the lows. And the dollar was down as well, almost 1%. When we go to the charts and take a look at these guys, S&P 500 here, we're really still inside this range. That really hasn't changed. We got up a little bit higher today than yesterday, or at least last night. I was talking about a potential nested ABCD structures inside this one that's already there. This one would be a smaller one. You have the larger one here, and that's kind of what they look like. So you kind of got nested ABCD structures potentially still that would take you down into these 2 swing point lows if it plays out that way. As far as the retest regen, that is still in effect here off this swing point low. You tried to test into the bottom of it today and closed just below it. So S&Ps still look as if they could try and roll back over. If we look at the stronger two, the NASDAQ and the Russell, NASDAQ taxed the top of that swing point low again, 50.81, got to 50.80, so just shy, doing a little bit less volume. That also looks like it could fail again at that level as a result. And so even though we don't have a signal here, we're coming into it with less volume, which is not good. Russell's the strongest one. Russell gets almost to the high, right? Remember we were talking about this being the target, 1275.84. We got to 1274.40, so we miss it by about $1. The volumes over there were 343 versus over here 322. So you come up to it, you don't have as much volume. You go over yesterday's high, back under it, but you have more volume than yesterday's high. That says this thing's going to try to test it again. And that probably comes tomorrow. So it looks to me like you got mixed signals here. The only one really giving a signal is the Russell. And the Russell that you could go test again. So that's what those look like. I didn't really see anything there that revealing. If I look at the world markets, we have to go to Europe, right? Because everything's happening in Europe. And the CACs in Europe tries to trade back down. Remember yesterday we were talking about it was going to try to bounce. Well, this tells you how weak it is when you get a signal that should bounce and doesn't, right? So it comes back in this prior little low. That was the breakdown bar, right? Broke this swing point low here. So what is it doing? It's doing 2 things. One is if we go back and show this one more time, we actually have an a retest regenerate bearish off this swing point low. Top of that bar, it gets to it, goes over it, back under it, Now it gets under it, and now it tries to come back into it again, but so far has failed to do that. This is trying to generate lower. There's a larger ABCD structure in place here if it wants to. And right now it kind of looks like it wants to, right? Because it can't break back higher. So there's that structure that's still in place. It's trying to regenerate lower. It hasn't been able to take this back out, right? That sets up the potential for this bearish ABCD structure that actualizes if it breaks this low. That low is 47.8392. It closes at 47.90, so it's right at it. No volumes down here, but then again, no volumes anywhere. That's the CACs. If we look at the DAX, and the DAX here, same structure, goes over, back under, less volume, failed on the retest region to get over it. This also has an ABCD structure in place from this high to a low to a high, and then back down into this area. Same thing. Neither one of them clear signals yet. Both of these still trying to press lower. And I say that because yesterday's signal was to try to trade higher today, and they were unable to hold it. Shanghai had traded lower, gets back under, back over, less volume. Shanghai is going to try to test higher again tonight. Now you're back into these bars, so these become the resistance on the way back. 498.530 up to this bar, actually probably the low here, and that's 50.48. So that's Shanghai, right? And I'll just draw it in right quick, but it's right in this area, right? That's where it's going to try to trade back into. If it gets back over this, it can go test the highs again. But what you're really doing is you're looking at these bars, and that happens to be in the same area, which is why that becomes the resistance on the way back up. If we go to Hong Kong trades down, under, back over, has a little bit more volume. That says this thing can trade lower again tomorrow. And those are the major ones overseas. The only other one I'd point out is that the Taipei market is trying to break down again. Doesn't have the volume. It's right there testing it, and I think it actually stayed under it. 91.91. Yeah, 91.83. So you're back underneath this low. It says you can push it lower, and tomorrow will be the test there to see if it does it. If we go to the OX markets, all right, because what's driving all this? Of course, the Fed today, the Greek situation tomorrow, and the next week or two, or whatever it's going to take. But if we go and look at the FXE, FXE has been holding strong. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that I've read some different articles of about maybe why this is happening. It seems to me like what's probably happening here is that the hard tone towards Greece is actually playing in favor of the euro, right? Because that's the fact that they're not going to give the money to Greece, if that's in fact what happens, is actually a good thing for the euro. And it's kind of convoluted, but that seems to be the way they're trading this. The other thing that's happening is that the Fed isn't moving as fast, which puts some pressure on the dollar. But as I said earlier, I didn't see anything in that statement today, and I read through the whole statement that was anything different than what we've seen before. So technically, euro hangs here, doesn't give it up. This thing's going to go try to test the highs. So the highs, and if we bring this over, the highs here are going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's not going to print in time though. So this is really still the high at this area, but the real resistance is these two bars. So it's going to try to trade back up to those. It does have the ABCD structure if in fact it gets going, and that would help the U.S. market if it did it right, if the euro actually traded higher. So that's kind of where it looks like it's trying to get to. First of all, of course, it has to get back over this area, right, on a weekly, on a daily. And you can't really look at ABCD structures on the dailies because it pops around so much. They trade overnight. The yen is actually putting a little pressure on the Japanese market, and some volume coming in here today. Of course, this all can dissipate tomorrow, depending on what happens, with Greece, and what happens with whether that Fed meeting continues to be interpreted the way it was today. I suspect that over time it's not going to be interpreted that way, because we're basically saying we are going to raise rates, and if we're going to raise rates, that's going to put pressure on the dollar to go higher. Okay, so gold, silver, they got a little bump off of this, but nothing special. They actually can move a little bit higher as well if you like to look at those. If I go to the OX markets, excuse me, not the OX, but the major sectors, and I'm going to pull up the just 2 or 3 of these, and the one I wanted to pull up in particular was the financials, because the financials are the ones that are benefiting from a lot of what's going on. So the financials, that high is a high volume high. It didn't get to today, pushed a lot of volume, probably going to get up there and test it again. And if I look at the technology sector, because these are like 35% of the weighting in the S&P 500, the technology sector actually has some decent volume today, and looks like it's going to try to trade back into this retest regen zone. So that one, both of those look like they're going to support the S&P. The ones that aren't, XLE, of course, this one's come all the way back down almost. If you look at it on a weekly, everybody was calling the bottom in this and saying it was time to buy. Well, they're almost back down to where they were. And the other one that is supportive of the S&P is the healthcare sector. So healthcare is still hanging at the highs. And actually, another one that's not as larger weighting is the XLY. So all of these still supporting the S&P 500. What's not is energy, is industrials. Industrials continue to struggle, right? Those are weighing against it. And if I look at technology, what's weighing against it is the SOX. SOX made that big run and then came all the way back. If you look at after hours, you had Oracle down big. Adobe was actually Adobe traded today off of last night's earnings. If we look at Adobe, you had a pretty big spike down on it. So technology stocks here coming out, getting hit. And so, when you look at that, you say, okay, technology is a big piece of this. If technology can't lift, we're going to have a hard time. S&Ps still do not want to give it up. I mean, that's the bottom line. Where we go really is where Europe goes. Europe is the one that's struggling more so than us. And those charts we just looked at are telling us that Europe's going to try to test those lows again. And if they get under them, they're going to finish off those ABCD structures. They're not that big, but it looks like they're going to try to press those lower still. I don't have much more tonight. That's it. I really don't have a bias for tomorrow. I don't see a bias. It's too mixed to call. You've also got quad witching coming on Friday. That's going to create some volatility as well. Unless you have some strong beliefs, this looks like a time to just kind of hunker down and wait it out, because it's not giving us any clean signals whatsoever. So take it for what it's worth. That's it for tonight. Have yourself a great one, and I'll see you next time. Good night.